Welcome to AP European History with Mr. Bowlby. Just a really quick lecture tonight. Chapter 18, a small section on culture and opinion, which is also very significant. The title of the chapter is Toward a New World View, still talking about the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment and the change in people's worldview. And this lecture is brought to you from the text of Mackay, Hill and Buckler, 7th edition. Just very briefly wanted to talk about urban culture and public opinion, which will lead us into French salons, most specifically Rococo style, some women's issues. In urban culture and public opinion, the one thing that is very significant in this chapter is the idea of the European book market. European book market grew dramatically in the 18th century. Titles appearing annually quadrupled from 600, in 1700 to over 2400 by 1780. There was a modest increase in literacy, but keep in mind that most of this change was still occurring with the elites, the upper class, but it was steadily growing. And book ownership increased tenfold. It was not uncommon to go into the house of a noble and find upwards of 300 books. Religious books decreased, history and law books maintained, and a dramatic rise in art and science books. The leader here was France. However, many of the books were not published in France. As we talked about earlier in this chapter, France was fairly strict. Book publishing, especially books that talked about or disavowed government or religion, were printed in much more free countries like the Netherlands, Switzerland, and England. And then they were smuggled into France under the coat or under the cloak books, as your text mentions. Scandalous material was written and devoured. It's almost compared to things like the National Enquirer, that's at the checkout counter at your grocery store, things like that. Many of the issues of scandal surrounded women and how they were able to influence weak male rulers, but nonetheless. Material that was read and devoured insatiably. And this leads us to what your text also refers to as the reading revolution, a whole new way of reading. Prior to this time, the patriarch of the family, usually the only one that could read, would sit down, read aloud, and people would cling to those words on bated breath. But now in this reading revolution, we start the idea of silent reading, rapid and insatiable reading, constant change in text and in subjects, and many numerous texts over many subjects. Reading continues to develop. Immanuel Kant, perhaps the greatest German philosopher of the time, spreads the idea of freedom of press, and he even gives his props to his Prussian ruler Frederick the Great for being an enlightened absolutist and allowing people the freedom to explore ideas through literature. And this is very significant. And this leads us to the rise of French salons. We'll be seeing one when we head down to the Minneapolis Institute of Art, a replica anyway. And these were social gatherings put on by elite women most of the time in private drawing rooms. High vaulted ceilings, lots of mirrors, intricate and decorative chandeliers and wall hangings. And these led to uncensored discussion of society, philosophy, literature, and science. And literally at these French salons would be the likes of Montesquieu and Fontenelle discussing all of these topics. Along with this came a style, more of interior design or of art, the Rococo style. This was feminine influence on art and civility, characterized by soft pastels, ornate interiors, sentimental portraits, lots of hearts and cupids, different things like that. Other things about salons. Most women still lacked rights. However, the position and the treatment of women became a measure of civility and decency. Most men at this time, even the noble elites, lacked some rights. And most philosophers, even those that we would consider to be the most enlightened of the day, still considered women subordinate in every way to men. Perhaps the most famous of those, and the most famous of the salons, was that held by Madame Geoffrin, and she was married at 15, had to a 48-year-old man who was adamantly opposed to her kind of after raising her four children, e- enlightening herself. But after he dies, she has an enormous amount of wealth that she uses, and she is considered the unofficial godmother of the encyclopedia. She funded it. She creates one of the most established salons with many of the famous thinkers that we've already discussed attending periodically. And she mentored many young women and passed on skills and education. These salons really created the expression that we have, the court of public opinion, because they did in all of the significant things that they talked about. This was really a transformation in this worldview. The idea that people were having discussions, deep and meaningful discussions about things. And it really also significantly united economic, social, and intellectual elites. Um, and this is going to eventually lead us to many of the revolutions that we're going to learn about.